As we get started, I'd like to invite Dr. Marie-Christine Nizzi, the president of Harvard Alumni for Mental Health, to welcome all of you and to share a few words.
Thank you very much, Julie. We have a couple more people coming in. It is our pleasure to invite you for today's exciting panel. My name is Marie-Christine Nizzi, and I'm the president of Harvard Alumni for Mental Health. Part of our mission is to broaden the dialogue about really frontiers in the domain of mental health. And if you're like me and you're following some of the news in science and medicine, you will have noticed that a lot of innovation is driven by models of health and illness that are centered on male models, male rats, male human beings. Very often, those models have driven the type of innovation that we are seeing in these domains. But our speakers today are challenging the status quo and really making a foray into supporting FemTech. And so I'm very excited that Harvard Alumni for Mental Health is bringing this content to you. And our Director of Tech and Mental Health, Dr. Julie Lee, is going to be the one leading today's panel. I will let her introduce your speakers for today. Julie Lee is Director of Harvard Alumni for Mental Health in Tech and Mental Health. She is a digital mental health strategist and a clinical psychologist committed to improving the mental health needs of underserved populations, including women, BIPOC, and students. She's a former Associate Dean of College at Brown University and is now the host of this event. Thank you, Julie. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for addressing this much needed topic.
Well, thank you for getting us started. I too am thrilled. I believe women's health has always been important, but too long there hasn't been enough attention, the research, discussion, and public awareness. So today's conversation will center around really the innovation some of the tech-driven ventures are actually bringing to this space of meeting the unmet needs of mental health among women. So I'm delighted to welcome our first panelist, Em. She's the co-founder and CEO of Samphire Neuroscience, a medical device technology company building wearable solution for neglected women's health needs. She's a neuroscientist by training, a graduate of Harvard College, and currently pursuing her doctorate at Oxford, and has experience working in academia, public health, and emergency medicine. Welcome, Em. And our second panelist is Victor, CEO of Moonalisa, which is a French venture that actually works at the intersection of healthcare and technology. After the acquisition of his first startup, Victor co-founded Moonalisa with the realization that current situation was unacceptable, and with the goal of using technology to scale medical knowledge and improve the sleep of 1 billion women. I appreciate that aspiration and goal because like many women, I also have struggled with insomnia at various points in my life. And I know that many women would be interested in learning about your new venture. So without further delay, I'd like to go ahead and start with the first question for our panelist. Would you please tell us about your company and what was the origin and inspiration for you to begin doing the work that you are currently doing? Em, would you like to go ahead and start us?
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks everyone for joining during this lunchtime talk. So my name is Em, and as Julie mentioned, I am the founder of Samphire Neuroscience and a trainee with the training in neuroscience before. And I think I came to Samphire from really many experiences throughout my life. Many of them were seeing all of the technological innovations that are developing, especially in the field of mental health and neurotechnology. So specifically, my previous past was working in neurotechnology for the treatment of depression. And as I saw all of these new technologies emerging where, our narratives over the last 20 years about depression have changed fundamentally. Before, we used to think of depression, as something that's ill with a person. It's their own problem, in some ways, even their guilt as well. And now over these 20 years, we've seen a lot of technologies emerge, and that has driven the fact that if it's a solvable problem, then maybe it's not the person's fault in the first place. And I think that has really changed the narrative around depression. And then as I was working in this field of depression, starting to talk to women who happen to have this depression that occurs every single month was very strange to me, because many may call it PMS. In a more severe form, it's known as PMDD, premenstrual dysphoric disorder. And it's a condition where women essentially experience equivalent effects to depression every single month for about a week, and then they're kind of back to normal. But it's a very cyclic and highly debilitating condition. And so observing that and noticing that the narrative of PMS is still the same as it was about depression 20 years ago was very striking to me, because PMS is somehow still women's fault, whereas depression has moved to this place of treatable mental health. And so that made me really reflect on the fact that, you know, if you make solutions, you can actually change the narrative around a lot of these conditions. So kind of looking at the innovations out there and thinking of what women need in the space specifically, we founded Samphire with the desire of building custom-made technology for women. So it is technology made specifically for women's menstrual, mental, and physical health needs. It's a wearable hairband that is based on our technology, and it stimulates two different regions of the brain to achieve relief for the mental health symptoms of PMS and PMDD and the physical symptoms of menstrual pain. And so in that way, it addresses not only the physical symptoms that are highly debilitating and don't let women get out of bed, but also the cognitive symptoms that oftentimes are as severe or even worse. So yeah, and now our idea is to bring it to as many women as possible with a long-term vision of being reimbursable and being available to all women who struggle with PMS and menstrual pain. And then that process changed the way we think about not only menstrual health, but also all cyclical health, whether that be, you know, gestational health, menopausal health down the line, that mental health is a critical aspect of women's lives as their hormone cycle through those different stages. And you know, obviously Victor has experience with the other cycles as well, but I'm very happy to contribute with this new technology and to build it alongside women, for women, and also prove that women alone are a huge enough market to build technology for. So yeah, very excited to be here.
Oh, absolutely. It's, you know, I am thrilled. When I connected with you, I learned of your innovation and the work. And obviously the technological innovation in itself is very exciting and can potentially be far reaching, because I would say majority of women I know have struggled with the PMS symptoms and, you know, related conditions, both mental and physical, that they found debilitating. I'm just curious, you probably have spoken to a lot of your would-be customers. What percentage of people, if you had to take a sort of guess, sort of responded to this question and excited about an innovation and a possible solution for this cyclical and mental health struggles?
Yeah, that's a great question, because actually it's the only question that I will probably answer 100% this evening, because I think that even though not everyone experiences those struggles of the women, every woman and every man knows someone who struggles with these symptoms and struggles and has sought solutions and hasn't found one. So even though I would suspect that, you know, probably up to a third of women, I can confidently say, experience one of these symptoms to an extent that affects their life meaningfully every single month, I'm confident that 100% know someone who is. And therefore, I think everyone is excited, because our mission is not to create a one-size-fits-all solution. It's to give women options. And the biggest problem, I think, in women's health is that because of lacking research, women just don't have options and are oftentimes led to believe that bad options are options and therefore that's good, which, you know, is kind of the history of women's health. So I think just providing options that can work for maybe not all, but some women is already very important. So yeah, that's very much the approach we take.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And also myself being very interested in adolescent and student mental health, I know many women have noticed, you know, their mood swings and you know, general sort of debilitating condition around their periods, but really have not found any meaningful solutions. So I think this is such an important area of needs, and you know, we're excited to hear more. So on that note, Victor, we'd love to turn to you and hear about your company and your inspiration and your goal of reaching 1 you know, billion women. That's so exciting.
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me today, Julie and Marie-Christine. So years ago, I was already in that space because with my co-founder Paul, we were already working on a health tech startup, and we were talking to like doctors and to our friends, sisters, mothers, we came across at the intersection of maternal health and mental health. We found out that there was a big issue, and we first starting developing a digitalized solution to address anxiety faced by a majority of pregnant women. And when we tried the solution on them, what we find out is that most of them didn't recognize that they were stressed or anxious, but they were feeling, they were always saying, hey, I'm tired, hey, I don't have energy. So this is when we decided to pivot on sleep. And doing more research on sleep, of course, we needed a solution for pregnant women, but some other women needed a solution. So we came to the idea to develop Moonalisa that can address sleep, not only for pregnant women, but for all women throughout their life moments. So what is Moonalisa? It's a virtual platform providing sleep programs tailored to women's life moments and to their level of insomnia. For those who are familiar with it, we base the solution on cognitive and behavioral therapies for insomnia. And on top of that, we provide coaching supports, and we will in a second time bring sleep experts where women will be able to do telehealth. So we have just launched the product, so feel free to register. And again, our solution is based on cognitive and behavioral therapy. Our goal is to make it accessible to all women. To do so, we surrounded ourselves with some of the best clinicians to make sure that we can get very good results, very good clinical results. We have a clinical trial starting soon, and our goal is once again to be reimbursed by insurances and to make it accessible through employees' benefits.
Yeah. That's fantastic. Thank you. It's so exciting, and congratulations, to have reached this point of launching your product. I know that's always such an important milestone for new ventures like yours. So I have a couple of questions, follow-up questions, which I imagine the audiences might be interested as well. It sounds like your solution will include telehealth. Would that service be provided by licensed clinicians or other professionals?
Yeah, it will be provided by licensed clinicians in the US.
Okay.
And I should precise that our solution is available only in the US, but I think I will be able maybe to touch on that at the end as we go through the panel. But
okay. That's great. Thank you. And it sounds like your interest and decision to focus on sleep actually sort of evolved and originated from you researching the physical and mental health needs of pregnant women. Is that right?
Yes, it's right.
Okay.
It's going through, like, actually it's testing. We had a solution 6 months ago. But the solution wasn't adapted for pregnant women, apparently, because they weren't willing to pay for it, and they were not able to perceive their anxiety and their stress. So
right. I appreciate that both of you actually mentioned that you're hoping your solution will eventually be covered either through employers or insurances, because I think that's such a critical piece to make solutions available at scale. When half of the world population, women, are struggling with insomnia or period-related mood swings, it really should not be left to individuals' ability to pay or have access in order to tap into these solutions. So I'm really excited about that prospect. So transitioning into our second question, obviously your companies are focusing on two critical areas of women's mental health needs, but we know there are so much other needs as well. So sort of taking a bird's eye view, I would love to hear from each of you. What do you see as greatest area of women's unmet mental health needs? And how might companies like yours and other FemTech ventures contribute in making some progress in this important area? Victor, can I ask you to go ahead and jump in first?
Yes. So obviously, I would have said insomnia. Well, I would have said sleep because I'm working sleep, and I think today's sleep isn't regarded as it should be. When you as it was the case for smoking cigarettes, that was seen as a sign of success or a sign of virility. I think sleep deprivation today is seen as a sign of productivity. Businesses run 24 hours a day, and some people like to say that short sleepers have an advantage, like Elon Musk can say when he says that he sleeps less than 4 hours a night. To make it clear, nobody has this genetic ability, and I think it's important to understand that that today sleep has a big impact on health, not just for women, but on health, and that twice as many women have insomnia compared to men, and that they don't have any concrete solutions because they can, of course, go see, they can take like sleeping pills, but we know that they have bad side effects. They can also go see behavioral therapists, but a few of them are trained when it comes to insomnia, and so they have to go for sleep tech solutions, but that are designed for men. And I think this is the case for most of the mental health solutions that have been designed for men, according to men's needs. And I think this is where FemTech has a bigger role to play. It's to go through a niche and do like some clinical trials, show that you have better like efficiency than current solutions. And I think this is how we will be able to tell the world that FemTech is important today.
Absolutely. I think you raise a really important point, and that is perhaps around this issue of insomnia and not getting enough sleep. There is sort of a cultural norms and values that might actually inadvertently or practically be impacting and reinforcing this idea: the less sleep you get, presumably more productive or harder you're working. But we know through science that's productivity, and productivity has a limit. The more you work doesn't necessarily translate into more productivity, but there is sort of the cultural notion that I think continue to permeate our work. So I appreciate that. So I think maybe this may seem like a kind of a tangential question, but audiences might be curious, as I am, Victor, how you became interested in women's mental health issues as a man.
As a man, I think it's through my previous experience in health tech. I was in touch with like doctors, and also my mother. She studied. She works at a hospital. My sister, she's in med school, and I was always talking to them about my anxiousness and my stress, and so I was always looking for like different solutions for myself. And what I found out is that of course there are solutions for us, but there are no real like solutions answering like all women's mental health issues, because women's health, and I think you will probably define it better than I, but women's health is so vast and so complex that even myself, I wasn't able to understand it at first, and found it very interesting. And when I started like being interested about it, not interested, but like starting getting to the subjects, I was surprised to see that all the clinicians, everyone was very open-minded to discuss with me, and they were very happy to see that male founders tackle these subjects.
Thank you. I appreciate, hearing about really, a part of that originated from your own personal experience with mental health, but also, probably recognizing and knowing women in your life. So thank you for sharing that. And Em, I'd love to hear your perspective about, women's mental health needs generally.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's very interesting to build up on some of Victor's points because I think he makes some very good observations about the state of mental health. So I think that the biggest reason where women's mental health is neglected is specifically around those cycles. So specifically, as I mentioned, the menstrual cycle, the gestational, and then menopausal. And I think it's because it's those cycles that are very different from what men experience otherwise. And I think kind of as his own experience, we're talking through all that, I think it is only now that we realize how important circadian rhythms are in our mental health, whether that be on the function of drugs, on the function of the rest of our lives. We are starting to factor in the fact that the time of day when you take a medication probably really matters. And actually the way you live your life, how much sleep you get, actually probably really matters on even drug absorption. But what we're not yet factoring in is that while men have only one cycle, which is the circadian rhythm over which most of our systems are based, the day and night, kind of cycle, women have multiple cycles operating at the same time that interact in very complex ways, whether that be the circadian and the menstrual, whether that be the circadian gestational, circadian menopausal. And I think that's very important because whenever you have two cycles, two waves interacting, you have much more complexity arising depending on where they overlap. And I think that's where we see women describing PMS, which is very blanket and, a social category because some women's PMS may be fatigue, as we see, some women's PMS may be low mood, and other ones may be mood instability. And while they arise from similar processes in the brain, the manifestation is very different for everyone. And so before we understand all of those phenotypes and the way that those cycles intersect, we can't actually design, custom-made solutions. So I think very much understanding cyclical health and building at each intersection of those cycles is very important. So, obviously the intervention on sleep and pregnancy is one of them. The intervention on PMS, broadly defined, and menstrual pain is another one. But actually we need so many more companies like mine and Victor's working at those different intersections and actually somehow connecting together. So I think actually a lot of work needs to be done and all of us working together so that women who come from us and, have learned to manage their mental health during their menstrual cycles are able to manage their changing needs as they go into the gestational cycle, for example. So I think actually understanding those intersections at the industry and solution level, but also at the basic research level is going to be the next frontier that, like circadian rhythms, unlock traditional medicine. They're going to unlock the women's health medicine because fundamentally those cycles are different. And I will emphasize here something that, I'm sure Victor and I share, but we're very much using the word women to relate to a particular group of people, but really it's everyone who's assigned female at birth is a client for us. Because I think at the end of the day, we want to recognize the fact that people are not in charge of their hormones and their hormonal health. And we want to make sure that we acknowledge everyone who experiences these symptoms along the way.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for
joining us today. Just a brief reminder, you're joining an exciting panel led by Julie Lee, Director of Tech and Mental Health, in an event organized by Harvard Alumni for Mental Health. And our co-sponsor today is the FACNE, the Franco-American Chamber of Commerce, New England. We thank them for co-organizing this sponsor today on FemTech, innovation in meeting unmet mental health needs of women. Thank you again for all joining us.
Absolutely. It's great to have many of you having doing this panel. I'd love to, I'm so encouraged, and excited, to learn about your work. And I couldn't agree more that there is so much work to be done in understanding women's cycles and hormonal changes that happen at, puberty, gestation, and menopause. It's interesting, and you may have seen it or you may heard about it, but this past Sunday in the US was Super Bowl. And for the first time that I could recall, there was a Super Bowl ad about women's menopause. And actually a solution. So this was absolutely the first time that I was able to say, wow, we're finally able to talk about the women's hormonal changes and cycles in a public way, because there has been so much stigma and shame and not feeling like women's concerns around these issues could be shared and spoken publicly. So that was a one small step in the right direction.
Really big moment, yeah.
Yeah,
Sure.
exactly. That's great. So moving on to the next question, and both of you actually touch upon this already. But generally, the women's health issue, whether it's medical or mental health conditions, typically do not receive funding, publicity, or interest from the investors. What do you think, from your own experience of launching your companies and seeking funding and interacting with researchers, what do you think needs to happen in order for us to move the needle in elevating women's mental health issues, so that there will continue to be innovation as well as research?
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I think something that we noticed always brings a wave of interest to our website, at least, is famous women talking about it. I think famous female women, especially athletes, are really a very big influence. For example, Iga Swiatek last year at the Oz Open was like, I wasn't able to perform at the level I wish I had. It's not an excuse, but I had PMS symptoms that I could not address. There is no solution out there. And I think whenever women who we respect, we understand, are very humble and open about the things they're dealing with, it encourages a lot of women to believe that, it's not something they're imagining in their head, because a lot of them are being turned down as well. The other one I think is, Victor being here, and, my co-founder is a man as well. I think is having more men interested in this topic. And I think this is very much where, women and women's mental health has to be seen as a commercially attractive market. And I think, coming from a scientific background and believing, science above all, solutions and clinical above all, I still very much believe that. But I do think that, if you don't also, like, you can't build a women's health company saying it's just the good thing, because I actually think that you're missing out a very big part of the story. Women are an integral part of our society, and a lot of their work is being missed out if we don't address their healthcare needs. Like, the way our healthcare system emerged is in order to address kind of the overall health of society. And what we have historically seen is actually that women's health needs are only really met when they threaten fertility or pregnancy or something that concerns the rest of society. But when they're in the menstrual phase and not necessarily in the critical phase or the menopausal phase, those phases often get ignored. And I think making sure that we recognize that women in those cycles are now increasingly participating in the work life. We see a lot more Gen Z, younger people entering the workforce, and we see a lot more women staying longer in the workforce, and we need to cater to their needs as well. And I think if we see that as a financial opportunity where women can show with their own finances and down the line with reimbursement as well, that they are able to dictate what technology gets developed for them, I think we will really change that environment as well. So I think seeing men, to me, in this field is very exciting, because it's people who don't necessarily come with, their own lived experience. And ironically or not, I find oftentimes that when I talk to people, a lot of the supposedly validity is brought by the fact that I may have experienced it myself. Whereas if you think of any other business, no one expects you, to have experienced necessarily big financial burdens to create a FinTech or something along those lines. So I think that applying the same logic to FemTech could be really enabling, because then you can actually see the opportunity as opposed to being blinded by the fact that it's only mission-led. So I think mission-led and kind of, commercially driven is also very important, because there is a lot of potential there.
Yeah, absolutely. You touched upon so many important factors. I'm tempted to ask many follow-up questions, but I try to hold back in interest of time. But I do have one a comment and question, and that is, I actually recently came across a reading that actually quantified the loss of productivity in dollar amount in the US because of women not being able to go to work or less engaged at work during menopause. So I think this is really elevating the basically companies to recognize we need to help these women, if not because it's the right thing to do, because it will help them to stay productive. Do you think such an approach to really ideally and principally, we shouldn't have to necessarily quantify the impact of importance of women's health, but the reality of sort of marketplace being what it is, do you think such a approach could be helpful in your opinion, Em?
Yeah, so I feel ambivalent about it, because I completely agree with you. And I actually think that, first and foremost, my opinion is that women's mental health matters. Point. Like, it shouldn't be quantified because, you know, we don't argue about a lot of those things. That being said, I obviously went to Harvard, so I spent a significant amount of time in the US and was an emergency medic there. So I saw a lot of the ways in which the system doesn't work for women. And I actually think that, you know, even if you look at the giving birth laws and, you know, healthcare protections for women in the US, a lot of the things you see is that what you would want to be taken as granted, that people deserve the right to healthcare, oftentimes actually isn't in a lot of very developed nations. So while I wish that would be the case and we wouldn't need to make an argument, the examples in the world show that a lot of it isn't just there, and we shouldn't take it for granted. And in that case, I think those arguments work very much in the system we live in now. But I think that whenever you use them, you have to keep in mind the fact that you will never be able to quantify the loss to families, to children who are being raised, to partners, and all the sacrifices that women make because of these conditions, because actually most of women's work is unpaid labor, and the vast majority of unpaid labor done globally is done by women. And in that sense, if it's unpaid, it's never quantified. And so if you start quantifying, you play in a man's world. And then I think you can go down a very, very tricky accounting hole. So if we want to quantify unpaid work appropriately, then I love that argument, because I think it would shock so many people that all the research money would go to women's health. But I think if we're not quantifying unpaid labor, then we're going to underestimate it, as we kind of historically had as well.
Right. Great point. Thank you so much. I couldn't agree with you more. Again, sort of even in one of, small segment of what you're talking about, the women's unpaid work, caregiving, all that happens that women continue to do and fulfill their responsibility, whether they're struggling with insomnia or cyclical mood swings. It's so interesting to think about the fact how women's mental health impacts actually the mental health of the families. There's this clear research that shows when a mother's mental health is compromised, it impacts the mental health of children as well. So I think the impact of women's mental health, you're right, couldn't possibly be quantified in a dollar amount for sure, but I think it certainly is important for us to recognize a far-reaching impact. And turning to you, Victor, we'd love to also hear your thoughts about what you see. What do you think needs to happen in order for us to see continued progress in the women's mental health?
So I think lots of very interesting things have been said, and I was about to touch the same points. I think we need to raise decision makers' awareness, and there is nobody better than well, of course, the government could be one, but I think it's easier to go to employers. And this is also why we are developing a solution for employers, because employers, as you said, they are definitely losses of productivity. It's difficult for them to well, I was going to say that today they have to reach equality gender objectives, and it's difficult for them and to retain their employees. For example, after a pregnancy, I think around 60% only of women return to work. So there are definitely things associated with women's health that employers need to take care of if they want to increase their productivity and to keep women employed. And also to follow up on what Hem was saying, I think it's interesting to say that tomorrow, if we have more male founders, or at least serial entrepreneurs or talented people who join FemTech, then it will definitely trigger a positive signal to investors, and they will definitely be putting more money into our startups because they never want to miss the next thing. So
yeah, absolutely. Such important points and so much work to be done. I think as I connected with you, both of you, I know you were based in Europe right now, and Victor, I think you were based in Europe. Are you currently in the US to prepare for your launch?
No, we are. I'm still in Paris. I'm still in Paris.
You're still both still based in Europe. So that was very striking to me. There certainly are US-based ventures that's been funded and growing that's focused on FemTech. But it seems to me that Europe is, at least one or two steps ahead of the US in sort of grappling with, women's mental health generally. Do you have any speculation in terms of why that might be the case?
If you want, I can start. As far as I'm concerned, I only know what's going on in France. As you may know, the French government pays for healthcare, and at the same time, he also is the one providing funding for research. So I'm pretty sure that the French government sees like he allocates more resources to women's health because he knows like the impacts on the economy and the cost of it. But that being said, I think in France, it's difficult to start a FemTech company because, as I mentioned, women, in the US, your healthcare system is what it is, but individuals are used to pay out of pocket for some of their healthcare, which is not the case in France. So bringing a technology in France is difficult if you want to have paying users. So this is also why we are jumping to the US because we found that we can have more like paying customers at first, while doing all the clinical trials that will enable us to get reimbursed and to go through employers then.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's really fascinating too. And hear that sometimes there might be more interest in innovation and research that's being done in Europe, but in fact, the way the healthcare is paid for in the US might actually make it a more further kind of a place to launch. How about you, Em? Any thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. So I was born and raised in Lithuania, which is a country in the EU. And then, I studied in the US and then I studied and now we live and we are based in London, which is, post-Brexit, no longer really Europe. So I've had the chance to observing how three very different systems work. And I think if I were to pinpoint why in general in Europe, but also I would say UK is a pretty big hub for FemTech as well. And generally I'll call it male tech as well. There's actually quite a few male technology companies happening there as well. And I actually think it's just the focus on family, I think is much bigger in Europe. And kind of as I was alluding to earlier, I think it just so happens that when we care about families, we start caring about women, which arguably we wouldn't want to be the case, which is why actually most of the research funding first goes into fertility and then maybe trickles down to other areas because we need to get women to that stage and then deal with them later, kind of. And so I think there's that phenomenon of just like, if you care more about family, I think as a consequence and a correlation, you will end up having a lot more investment into women's health. So I think there's that. I think to Victor's point about paying customers and kind of reimbursement as well, I think it really matters also on mentality, not of employers and governments on family, but of women and what they think they deserve as well. And I think in the US, there's, seeing people and having people getting used to the fact that healthcare is not a right makes people think much more about what conditions are real and which ones aren't. And it just so happens that a lot of women, when they go to doctors to complain about their women's health issues, such as menstrual mood swings or menstrual pain, it's like, how are you different from any other woman? Everyone experiences it. So if you're choosing on how to allocate funds of your own, you will probably choose to allocate them to real illnesses, which are the illnesses also felt by men, as opposed to those by women. And so it's only by women. And I think what's very interesting about that, so in the field of depression, one thing that we know is that depression for women with PMS gets always much worse in the premenstrual period. And also the premenstrual period is usually when the depression and suicidal ideation comes back for a lot of women, it tends to worsen. And actually that's across conditions, same with anxiety, same with any other pre-existing condition. And women may be spending already money on psychiatrists and psychologists treating depression or anxiety because it's a shared thing, but will rarely address the fact that it's cyclical. And if you were to just avoid that bump, you could probably not recycle through it again. And I think that's very important because it kind of reinforces the fact that women don't deserve to invest in the treatment of those women's health conditions that are separate. And I think the last kind of reason that I really think contributes to all of it is the way that our healthcare system is organized. And I'm not here to reorganize the entire healthcare system, but I think for women's health, it's especially dysfunctional because most women with mental health issues will usually go to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist will be like, oh, that's associated with your menstruation, gestation, menopause, go to the gynecologist. And the gynecologist doesn't know mental health. It's not their area of expertise. That's not what they're trained in. And then they'll be like, cool, so for physical, we can address mental health, go to the psychiatrist. And they do the swap all the time. That actually isn't productive for anyone involved. And the reason for it is that actually no one has the data and no one gets the training. So I think actually, if we do want to solve this long term with not only reimbursement and solutions, but also training and getting women diagnosed appropriately and recognizing for it, that's also an important cause. And I would be surprised if that emerged in the US, where women have to proactively decide what matters when they're always told that the women's health stuff matters less. So I think Europe will definitely drive that innovation, and the importance is in making sure that we see what good is happening in Europe and also bringing it across to the US. So for example, for us, we will be launching in Europe and the US around the same time, which will be early 2024. And we really do want to see, kind of the differences in people who come to us, because we do expect that we'll see slightly different people who end up showing up. So in the US, we expect a lot more people who've been acknowledged by their doctors, whereas in Europe, we expect a lot more women to show up because they know that their health already matters, as opposed to having necessarily that external validation as well.
Yeah. A couple of really, really important points about, how we conceptualize the importance of women's health and the way the health coverage is offered and covered financially does play a role clearly. In the US, I think, there's still parity between physical health and coverage for mental health coverage. So you're absolutely right. When there isn't enough mental health coverage to talk about women's mental health, it's creates that even a starker and more significant parity. So I think that's a really important point. I also want to just thank you for bringing up importance of training and education. I have actually, spoken to a number of OBGYN doctors because I started to realize, boy, how many OBGYN doctors, and presumably these are doctors whose specialty is focused on women's health, actually understand impact of menopause. And this was an unscientific survey, so to speak. They said they remember having one, at most 2 lectures on menopause. But when we think about the longevity of women's life now, women expected to live until late 80s and 90s, it's actually sort of staggering to see that there is so little education and training for actually the specialists who care for women around these issues of birth and delivery and gestation, have so little training. So that certainly is an important area of needs. So that brings us to our last question. It's been fascinating and inspiring to hear from each of you about your work, your clear passion and commitment to advancing women's mental health. I'm thrilled and will be excitingly looking, continuing to follow your work. We may have in our audience, we may have some people who are clinicians, maybe physicians, healthcare workers, or even would-be or aspiring entrepreneurs. What word of advice would you share with those who are interested in this space, who might be interested in starting their company or working in one of the FemTech companies? What do you see as both opportunities and challenges, and what advice might you give? And would you like to jump back?
Yeah, sure. I think in terms of someone starting something in the area, especially because there might be a lot of practitioners with unique exposure to these areas as well, I think speak to the women and your patients or, clients in any other way first. I think I was kind of very much starting from talking to people and understanding that that's something that they need, that women really seek solutions and alternatives for their menstrual health care. But then when you start going into the funding realm, and I saw a question in the comments about it as well, investors want to see a lot of different things, because a lot of investors are not women and they are not experts in women's health. And they're like, you know, if you're working in women's mental health, can you just make it generic mental health and therefore make it for everyone? Right. And I think don't understand a lot of those nuances. So I think when you're early on, especially, it's very easy to be swayed by the fact, if only if I swayed away, it would be so much easier to get funding, so much easier to solve things. Right. But I think that's how we perpetuate the fact that women are not heard. And I think that if you hear your users, then any investor will recognize the fact that you understand the market that no one else does. So I think stay committed to the cause that you're working towards, because probably there's a reason you decided to take the risk. It's not easy to start a business, start a venture, start an NGO, you know, whatever you're doing. So that's advice number one, stay true to your users. And advice number two is definitely find the right people to do it with. You know, I think whenever you start something new, you want to completely trust the person you're working with and have very good communication between yourselves. And I think that, you know, my personal recommendation is never start something on your own, because you will only have one perspective. And you will never be questioned. And I think those are the most risky things that you can have. And I think it's especially risky in FemTech, because unfortunately, whatever you say will probably spread a lot because it's something new to people. So you have to take your words very responsibly. And if you go unchecked, I think there's quite a bit of risk in there. And in terms of the, I guess, more challenging areas in general that I see in FemTech, especially because I assume that's why a lot of the audience is here, I think the boundaries of FemTech are still very poorly defined, and kind of everyone who wants to be FemTech is FemTech. And I think there's a lot of discourse around that area. So I think, you know, we actively choose to identify ourselves as part of the FemTech movement. But again, I do think it's quite excluding potentially to people who do not identify as female and still experience a lot of those issues. It can be alienating to a lot of mothers or menopausal women who are just not necessarily aware of what FemTech is, and the fact that there is actually a separation between women's health and health in general, because for most women, women's health is health. So I think very much choose carefully, you know, how you want to present yourself and who you want to speak to. But also it's a much vaster space than you think it is. Like within FemTech is really all of health tech. And I think women's health is so under research. And so there are so many solutions still lacking that actually, if you can build an area, any area of health tech, you can also build it in FemTech. And I'd really encourage people to do that. And I think that women are so keen on targeted solutions. They are in households, women make the most medical decisions, and they actually buy the most medical technology compared to men, because, you know, they're usually the household responsibles of money in regards to medical technology. So building for them does make a lot of sense. So definitely encourage everyone to go into the area and kind of staying true to the mission that drove them there and not swaying too much away from it as well.
Yeah. Thank you. That's thank you so much. One of our audiences actually asked the question that you probably are seeing in the chat that I think you actually you know, ended up addressing through your answer. So I really appreciate it. You know, being committed to women, their customers, their needs, and really continuing to innovate and staying focused on the mission seems incredibly important. And how about from you, Victor?
I think I agree on most of what you have said. The difficulty can be defining market sizing. I know that some investors we have been talking to, they don't really understand like what are the underlying principles behind a defined market in women's health, because most of them are men. So usually they don't really, like most of FemTech companies start very niche, and they don't like things that don't scale, obviously. And which I understand, but it's important to explain to them that your niche is that you need to start as a niche to get the credibility, and then once you get this credibility, it's easy to scale. But you need to start niche to make it work. So this is one point. And the second is that I think, as you said, Joey, half of the population is a woman. I think in the US, they take up to 80% of their household decisions when it comes to healthcare. They pick up 70% of the drugs are picked up by women. So I think that they are the medical officer of their household, and it gives for investors, I think it gives lots of promising opportunities as women are well educated, they work and have money to spend on their healthcare, because there are not that many solutions that that can answer the needs.
Yeah. I'll actually jump on here as well, because I think that, Victor, you touched on a very important point about market sizing in general, because we see our technology, and I suspect you do too, Victor, as our technology is market making, which means there's actually no one else who's specifically targeting PMS that is a medical device. There are no other medically cleared solutions for PMS, and alternatives that are similar in their mechanism to our pain solution as well. And in that sense, it's actually very difficult to find your market because no one has addressed it before. And in women's health, especially women's mental health, there are so many of those empty spaces as well that are going to be market making, like no one has addressed them before. And so I think there's also always the right investors. For us ended up being the people who saw the vision and saw in many ways the problem as well, but they didn't ask us for the specific numbers in the end of the day, because they do understand that there is risk involved with any new market, but they know that the risk is minimized when so many women deal with this and when it is such visible problems kind of across the board as well. So don't be afraid of the fact if you can't find those numbers, and find your real market as well, because all of those numbers are kind of made up. In the end of the day, it's you and your users, and it's the people you're working with. And I think that as long as your investors understand that, then they're the right people to join you on the journey, and you will find them eventually.
Yeah. Great, great thoughts. Thank you. We do have another question from the audience. How are you marketing to teenagers or their parents? And would you like to jump in? Because obviously, PMS affects adolescent girls.
Sure, that's a great question. So to be completely transparent, at launch, we will not be available to people under 18. So that answers a lot of the question. The main reason being is that we are running a lot of trials, and while the technology is very safe, there is limited research on adolescents. And so we kind of want to make sure that we launch as, safe and restricted, and only use very well researched data. We don't want to take any risks, which is why we also don't recommend pregnant women to use our device, which they normally shouldn't need, as they shouldn't be menstruating during that time anyway. But we do want to make sure that we follow those guidelines. So for us, it was an easy answer. Down the line, I do suspect we will be entering that market as well, because as Julie mentioned, a lot of, especially young girls, really struggle with the pain symptoms that we can really help give a drug-free solution to. However, something that we keep seeing with the women we are working with is that as women age, their pain symptoms tend to decline and their cognitive symptoms tend to increase around their menstruation. So we actually think that a lot of our kind of target customers are actually 30 to 40 years old, because they're very high achieving women who start noticing that the cognitive symptoms become debilitating. And even though we have a lot of interest in the kind of 20 to 30 group, oftentimes it's people with a mix of symptoms, but the cognitive symptoms are extremely, extremely damaging when you're a woman seeking a very senior position, kind of promotions and everything, when a lot of those decisions get made, as well as often trying to manage family for many women. So we think that's a very big niche for us.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so many ways, I feel like we could talk for another hour because there's so many, intersectionalities of your, and as you were talking, you're right. Women in their, 30s and 40s, they're carrying a lot of responsibilities for themselves. They're advancing their careers. They're taking care of their families. And they're also experiencing elevated concerns for their mental health. So I think, it's so important for us to keep sort of external and life transitions and responsibilities women carry, in addition to, understanding the cycles that you mentioned earlier. It's been an absolute pleasure to have both of you on the panel. Thank you so much for joining us today. We all benefit from your thoughts on women's health. We will continue to follow you and to be interested in learning about your progress. For audiences, thank you for joining us. If you enjoyed our panel today, we'll love to have you become more involved and join HAM. Harvard Alumni for Mental Health is open to all. I've added a link in the chat so that you could actually be added to our mailing list. When you do join our mailing list, you will be receiving a monthly newsletter that includes a list of events, as well as other partner information related to mental health. So I think you would enjoy it. Lastly, I'd like to mention that, Hemp is a nonprofit, and we are able to operate and bring these fantastic programs to you through generous support and sponsorship from our sponsors and donors. So if you are so inclined, we will welcome your donation. I've just included a link to our PayPal account. On that note, thank you again, Em and Victor, and Marie-Christine for joining our panel and all our audiences. We are inspired by your work, and we will continue to follow and look for more progress in this important area.
Thanks so much.